I'm Miss Hyde from Olympian High School. We're going to use the Traditions and Encounters textbook, Chapter 40, to look at cross-cultural exchanges and global communications. In the reading, there are these two paragraphs before it starts talking about some specific examples of the exchange of cultural ideas and global communications. And these two paragraphs are just talking about how beyond, some of the trade that's taking place, we also are seeing how culture and culture is spreading throughout the world, and how it's not as important as it was before. The national boundaries aren't as important as they were before, as people are able to access information about others through things like television. Now, back then it was television and radio. These days we might argue it's things like the internet and Twitter and TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. So these are technological developments that make it easy to see what someone in Africa is doing, what someone in Antarctica is doing, and that's going to help spread cultural ideas. In addition to these cultural ideas diffusing from the United States and from Europe outward to the rest of the world, we also see cultural ideas from the rest of the world coming back to the United States. So we don't want to think that it's just a unidirectional process. It's happening in both directions. So it's talking about, in this first paragraph, a little bit about the fall of the Berlin Wall, global consumer culture, people drinking Coca-Cola. These are all represent or symbolic of the spread of culture, American culture, as seen on TV. So in the old days, people largely subscribed to local traditions, but in this time period, we're seeing some cultural practices becoming globally known. And it ends with a reference to the song, It's a Small World After All. If you've ever gone to Disneyland, there's also a ride that you can go on, which references this jingle that became popular in the World's Fair in New York City, 1964-65, which basically shows all of the different cultures in the world and how the world is sort of feeling like it's becoming smaller. One of the first examples the book talks about is the Global Barbie. So here I want to introduce you to the idea of a Trojan horse. So a Trojan horse is a symbolic thing. It refers to this story of basically an innocent-looking wood horse that was used during a war with Troy, the city of Troy, where the Greeks were actually hiding in the horse, and then they were able to enter the city through this Trojan horse. So you can look this up on your own, but it's basically a reference to how something that looks innocent can actually be something that's dangerous or negative. So what's the Trojan horse in the Global Barbie story? It's Barbie and what Barbie represents and symbolizes. So in some parts of the world, it's not okay to date. It's not okay to have an open sexual relationship with someone before marriage. For example, in Islamic cultures and Islamic countries, there's a more conservative attitude around dating. And so in Iran, there was an attempt to counter what Barbie represented, which is premarital sex, potentially a relationship with her and Ken, never aging, with these dolls that were called Sarah and Dara. And this is just explaining to you a little bit about some of the ideas about the Sarah doll and the Dara doll, her brother, who's an Islamic cleric. So this is just a reference to how some communities tried to fight back against the diffusion or the spread of American culture, because they saw these products as not just innocent toys, but potentially influencing the minds of the kids to think that it's okay to have a boyfriend, and to think that it's okay to be kind of plastic and perfect and never have a family, never get old. So you'll read about that in your book. Now, this is just one example of a community trying to offer an alternative. Barbie continued to be really popular in Iran, but it's just telling you about how Barbie represented a symbol of U.S. culture penetrating in Iran, and U.S. culture went all over the world. And that's not to say that other cultures didn't also have an impact on the United States, but this is an example of the U.S. culture spreading and there being a small backlash here against it. Now, Barbie was also changed in Japan. So in Japan, Barbie actually was seen as too toothy, too aggressively toothy, too much of a working woman on the go. And in response, Mattel, the company that owned Barbie, made her face rounder, made her eyes bigger, made her not show her teeth. And the reason this is an interesting story is because of what it represents. And it represents American companies modifying their products in order to appeal to a specific market. So what you should take away from this is it's not as if US or American culture spread wholesale to other countries. It was also changing American products and having an impact on American culture. So although the spread of Barbie all over the world represents in some ways the diffusion of American culture, it's not completely the same as it is in the United States. There are changes that take place, and but it does represent, the diffusion of American products.